Welcome to this journey through one of the most unsettling cases recorded in the history of the United States. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time at which you're listening to this narration. We are interested to know how far these documented accounts reach and at what moments of day or night they find their listeners.
Charleston's slave markets handled thousands of transactions every year, but only once did the city's auctioneers refuse to sell a man without attaching warnings written directly onto his bill of sale. The paper, discovered in a private family trunk in 1989, described a 28-year-old field hand whose previous 3 owners had all died under circumstances the Charleston authorities quietly stepped away from. What made this man so dangerous wasn't violence or rebellion, the two things the plantation class feared most. It was something the officials couldn't label, something that made seasoned traders mutter prayers under their breath and glance toward the rafters as if expecting judgment to fall. Harper's exchange market demanded every potential buyer sign a separate acknowledgement of risk, even though the document never specified what the risk actually was. 7 men raised their hands to bid that afternoon. Only one stayed in the running long enough to complete the purchase. Before you hear what happened to the man who ignored every warning, there's something you need to do. Hit that subscribe button right now, because stories like this, stories buried in courthouse attics and forgotten archives, are exactly what this channel brings back to life. And drop a comment telling me what state you're watching from. I want to know how far these lost American mysteries travel. Now, let's discover why Charleston's most experienced slave brokers called this the worst sale they had ever witnessed. The transaction took place on March 11, 1843, at Harper's Exchange Market on Meeting Street, one of Charleston's busiest auction houses. The building still stands, though most tourists wandering past its brick walls have no idea what scenes once played out inside. Harper specialized in prime field hands, young men with powerful builds who could labor from dawn to dusk in the low-country rice fields that made plantation owners wealthy beyond imagination. March was peak buying season. Planters came hunting for bodies that could be pushed hard during spring planting, and Harper's ran auctions 3 times a week to satisfy demand. The man brought in chains that morning carried no name in the catalog. The ledger listed him simply as Subject 14, male, estimated 28 years, origin Virginia. That was common. Many enslaved people arrived stripped of every part of their identity except the muscles that could be sold. But the clerk had added something unusual beside the entry. A note in red ink. Special terms. Speak with manager before bidding. Jonathan Mercer stood in the back of the crowded room that morning, arms folded behind his back, the posture of a man who'd spent his adult life assessing human bodies with the precision of a banker reading ledgers. At 48, Mercer owned Redwood Plantation, nearly 4,000 acres of rice fields north of Charleston along the Ashley River, a stretch of land his family had been expanding for 2 generations. He'd built his wealth carefully, buying adjacent parcels, consolidating them, and running the entire operation with strict discipline and no illusions about sentiment. His peers respected him, his workforce feared him, but no more than they feared most masters. Nothing about his reputation stood out until the day he bought Elias. The morning's auction proceeded normally through 17 lots. Men and women mounted the platform while buyers examined their teeth, checked backs for whip scars that hinted at rebellion, pressed thumbs into shoulders to test muscle. Prices soared as expected.
Prime men fetched between $950 and $1,300. Women sold for slightly less. Children by speculation. Then the auctioneer called Lot 18, and something shifted, something subtle but unmistakable. 2 handlers escorted the man onto the raised platform. Mercer noticed immediately that both handlers kept unusual distance, standing a foot farther back than they had with anyone else. The enslaved man stood motionless in the center, wrists bound with iron, ankle shackles forcing a shortened, awkward stance. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, with the shoulders of a lifetime laborer and hands marked by long, brutal work. But it wasn't his strength that caught Mercer's attention, it was his face. Nothing moved in it. No fear, no anger, no forced expression of submission. His eyes drifted across the crowd with the mild interest of someone observing a faraway horizon. When the auctioneer began his practiced pitch, the man's gaze fixed on a point above the buyers' heads and held there, as if locked to an invisible hook. Lot 18, the auctioneer called. Prime field hand, approximately 28, Virginia Piedmont. Strong constitution, no infirmities. He paused, glanced at his notes. Special terms apply. All interested bidders must speak with Manager Sloan before placing an offer. A murmur rolled through the crowd. In over 20 years attending auctions, Mercer had never heard such a thing. 3 men stepped out of line to consult Sloan in the side office. Minutes later, all 3 returned, 2 visibly shaken, 1 pale as if struck by sudden illness. None resumed a bidding position. The pale one caught Mercer's eye and whispered, "Don't do it, Mercer. Whatever price they name, leave it." Mercer turned back toward the platform. The man, Elias, though Mercer did not yet know the name, remained absolutely still. Mercer moved toward Manager Sloan's office, curiosity overriding caution. 4 other men stood in line ahead of him, each walking away a little faster than they had arrived. When his turn came, Sloan closed the door behind them and lowered his voice. He pulled out a thin folder. 3 documents, all yellowed at the edges, all handled more times than paper should comfortably endure. "Before you bid," Sloan said quietly, "you need to understand this man's history." Mercer arched an eyebrow. "I've never heard of an auction house discouraging a sale." "Neither have I," Sloan replied, "but this is no ordinary case." He opened the first document. His first recorded owner was a tobacco planter named Harlan Boyd in Pittsylvania County, Virginia. Bought him in Richmond in 1838. 14 months later, Boyd was dead. They said heart failure. But read this. Sloan slid across a page written in the agitated scrawl of a plantation overseer. The entry described Boyd's final 3 days, days consumed by panic, interrogations, accusations of conspiracies among his enslaved workers. He questioned Elias repeatedly, convinced the silent young man knew something he refused to say. Each morning, Boyd grew more frantic, more obsessed, more convinced that some unnamed catastrophe loomed just out of sight. On the 4th morning, Boyd was found dead in his tobacco barn. No marks, no struggle, no reason. "This doesn't prove anything," Mercer said, though he felt something cold tighten beneath his ribs. "It proves coincidence," Sloan agreed, until you read the second document. The next bill of sale showed Elias transferred to Virgil Ames, a planter in Halifax County. Ames lasted 11 months. His body swung from a rafter in his study, discovered after 3 nights of no sleep, and letters filled with dreams he could not escape, and threats he could not name. His handwriting began crisp and orderly, then grew jagged and wild in the final pages. His overseer reported the same pattern as Boyd's: escalating fear, fixation on Elias, obsessions that spiraled beyond reason. His wife found him wandering the fields at night, claiming he heard whispers telling him to beware. But the fields were empty. Mercer inhaled slowly, suppressing the instinct to dismiss the tale as superstition. "And the third owner?" he asked. "A Richmond merchant named Lane. Intended to flip Elias for a profit. Owned him 6 weeks. Dropped dead behind his desk. Doc called it a stroke." Sloan tapped the last document, this one a letter from Lane's estate executor. It was written by a man accustomed to precision and composure, but the final paragraph trembled with fear. "I cannot claim this man caused these deaths. I can only state the pattern. 3 owners, 3 devolutions into terror, 3 deaths without physical cause. If this is coincidence, it is a coincidence darker than any I have encountered in my years of practice." Mercer read the line twice, and again. The room felt smaller, air thickening around him. "You still intend to bid?" Sloan said quietly. It wasn't a question. "I intend to understand what I'm buying," Mercer replied. "Then understand this," Sloan told him. "Elias has never harmed anyone. He obeys orders, works hard, never rebels, never fights, never speaks more than necessary. But men who own him change. Something happens to them, something internal, not external, something no law can name. Mercer left the office with the folder's weight still pressing against his thoughts. By the time he returned to the auction floor, the auctioneer was preparing to close lot 18 with no bids. Elias stood exactly as he had left him, still, silent, eyes fixed on that strange point beyond the crowd. Mercer lifted his hand. 500, he called. Gasps scattered through the room. 500 was low for a man of such build, but high for a man with such ominous warnings. The auctioneer, relieved beyond professionalism, repeated the number loudly. 500! Do I hear 550? The room remained still. Every buyer had already made their decision, and it wasn't financial. It was survival. 500 going once, twice. The gavel struck. Sold to Mr. Jonathan Mercer of Redwood Plantation. The paperwork took less than an hour. Mercer signed his name beneath a special acknowledgement clause, confirming he had been informed of extraordinary circumstances. Sloane watched him with something between pity and resignation. His name is Elias, Sloane said as they concluded. He answers when spoken to, never resists. If you didn't know the history, you'd think you'd found the most reliable worker on the market. But I do know it, Mercer said. Then heed this, Sloane added. If you start thinking or feeling things that don't match your nature, write them down and tell someone you trust. The worst thing the previous owners did was keep their fears to themselves. Mercer didn't respond. 2 hours later, Elias arrived at Redwood Plantation in the back of a wagon, shackles still clamped around his wrists and ankles. The land unfolded in perfect geometric rows of rice fields glistening beneath the late winter sun. Redwood held nearly 70 enslaved men and women, housed in 2 long rows of cabins behind the main house. Mercer's overseer, Caleb Reddick, a disciplined Georgian with a reputation for controlled efficiency, met the wagon. Assign him to Moses's crew. North Fields. Moses will keep close watch. Moses, a lead driver who had worked the plantation for 16 years, studied Elias carefully. What exactly am I watching for, sir? Anything unusual? With respect, that covers a great many things. Mercer's jaw tightened. Documented, whatever it is. The first week passed quietly. Elias worked tirelessly, said little, ate alone, slept without incident. Moses reported no infractions, no laziness, no hints of temper. He's quiet, but not broken. Men who are broken look past you. He looks at you. He just doesn't appear to care what he sees, Moses said. By the second week, Mercer caught himself thinking about Elias more than he meant to, watching from his window, searching for the tall figure in the fields, waking at night with vague unease he couldn't explain. And by the third week, the first crack in Redwood's routine appeared. 2 field hands got into a fight over stolen food rations. Reddick punished them both, but when Moses relayed the details to Mercer, he added an odd note. Both men said they felt watched for days beforehand, said Elias stood nearby sometimes, not interfering, just staring with that same blank face. They said it made their nerves raw, like they were being judged by someone who didn't care what the verdict was. Reddick dismissed it. Slaves blame whoever they can. It means nothing. Move him to the South Fields, Mercer ordered. Let him work the river crew. I want to see whether the tension follows. It did. The river crew reported the same shift within days. Nothing overt, nothing measurable, just an uneasiness that seeped into the edges of routine. Workers snapped at each other over trivial matters. Tasks normally carried out in steady rhythm were interrupted by hesitation, second-guessing, and irritability. When Reddick pressed the crew for specific complaints, they struggled to articulate anything concrete. "It's him," one finally muttered. "Elias. He don't talk, don't smile, don't frown, don't nothing.
Feels like working beside an empty house after dark. You know something's inside, but you can't hear it breathe. Reddick scoffed. You people get nervous over shadows. But Mercer had begun keeping a journal, just as Sloan advised, noting every report, every shift in tone, every unfamiliar thought. He didn't like where the notes were heading. The fourth week brought the first nightmare. Mercer dreamed he stood at the edge of his rice fields at dawn, watching his workers move through their usual motions. Everything looked normal until he noticed the rhythm was wrong, too synchronized, too mechanical. They weren't working, they were performing the motions of work, while every pair of eyes, without exception, stared past him. He turned. Elias stood alone at the tree line, motionless, eyes fixed on Mercer with a blankness so complete it felt like drowning. Mercer woke drenched in sweat, lungs straining, heart hammering. By breakfast, he dismissed it as exhaustion, but that night brought another nightmare, different in detail, identical in feeling, and the night after, another. A month after the purchase, Mercer found himself unable to sleep. He would rise at 3 a.m, walk to his study window, and stare out across Redwood's silent fields. The quarters glowed with faint lamplight. The river whispered beyond the trees. Everything appeared ordinary, yet an invisible pressure coiled inside his chest like a fist tightening day by day. Caleb Reddick finally approached him one morning.
"Sir, you seem unwell," he said carefully. "Is there something I should know?" Mercer stared at him too long before answering. "No, manage the fields." But the lie tasted bitter. By early May, the change in Mercer had become impossible to ignore. He rode out to the south fields 3 times in one day, each time positioning himself where he could watch Elias specifically. He said nothing to anyone, just watched, then turned away abruptly and rode back toward the main house. "Man's pacing like a panther," Reddick said to Moses that evening. "Something's gnawing at him, and we both know what." Moses didn't respond immediately. He rubbed a hand over his jaw, staring in the direction of the river. "Tell me honest," Reddick said. "You noticed anything strange about Elias since he arrived?" "I notice he's the quietest man I ever seen. Quiet in a way that ain't peace. Quiet in a way that's absence. Like he steps out of himself when nobody's looking." Reddick made the sign of the cross, half joking, half not. "You saying there's something unnatural about him?" "I'm saying I don't know. But I do know Mr. Mercer is changing, and that change began the day Elias stepped on this property." 2 days later, May 10th, Mercer summoned both men to his study. "I'm selling him," Mercer announced, voice tight. "I've contacted a trader in Savannah, a man accustomed to complicated cases. He'll take him for 300. Reddick frowned. "Sir, that's a substantial loss." "Irrelevant." "May I ask the reason?" "Disruption," Mercer said. "He's disrupting the plantation." "With respect," Reddick said carefully, "the work is getting done. The schedule holds. There's no direct issue." "He's disrupting it," Mercer repeated, sharper this time. "And that is the end of the matter." Reddick bowed his head and left. Moses remained. "You think I'm wrong," Mercer said without looking at him. "I think you're afraid, sir. And in all the years I've been here, I ain't never once seen you afraid of anything." Mercer swallowed hard. "Then look at me now." He rose and walked to the window overlooking his vast plantation, the land he'd mastered, the world he controlled. But lately, the familiar landscape felt foreign, like a stage set waiting for disaster. "I lie awake expecting something dreadful," Mercer whispered. "I watch my own wife and wonder if she's keeping secrets. I watch Reddick and wonder if he plots behind my back. I see danger in every corner and can't name a single reason. And the only new variable in my life is Elias."
Maybe that's the point, Moses said quietly. Mercer turned sharply. Explain. Maybe the danger ain't what he does. Maybe it's what we do to ourselves trying to figure him out. The words froze Mercer more than any nightmare had. He dismissed Moses abruptly, but the thought stayed with him, nested deep, rooting. That night, Mercer didn't sleep at all. He sat in his study, staring at the candle flame until sunrise, until the world reassured him it was still there. The Savannah trader Rufus Hale arrived on May 17th, a tall, ruddy man with eyes narrowed by years of calculation. Hale prided himself on handling special stock. Elias was brought out for inspection. As Hale probed his arms, checked his teeth, tested his stance, Elias stood with perfect compliance, offering neither defiance nor curiosity, just that same hollow calm. Good muscle, good build. I can work with this. Why selling at a loss? Mercer had rehearsed his answer. He's causing unrest among my workers. Nothing over it, but enough. Hale studied him for a long moment. You sure that's all? He asked quietly. I've seen desperate men unburden themselves with stories they don't understand. What else would it be? Hale shrugged. You looked like someone trying to outrun a shadow. 300. Take him or leave him. Hale took him. The wagon rolled away down Redwood's long road. Elias sat in the back, posture unchanged, eyes forward, showing no sign that anything in his life had shifted. Mercer exhaled. Relief washed over him so powerfully he felt dizzy. That night, he slept without dreams for the first time in nearly a month. The relief lasted 3 days. On the 4th, a courier arrived from Savannah, carrying a letter in a trembling hand. It was from Hale. And nothing in Mercer's life would ever be the same after reading it.
The envelope was creased, damp around the edges, as though Hale's hands had sweated through the paper. Mercer unfolded the letter carefully. The handwriting, normally bold and self-assured, slanted downward in uneven strokes. Mr. Mercer, I am returning Elias to you at once. I cannot keep him. I will not keep him. What follows is an account of the past 3 days, written with as much clarity as my rattled nerves will allow. When I left your plantation, I believed I had acquired prime stock at a bargain. My intention was simple: keep him a short while, let any difficulties surface, then resell him at a profit in Savannah. That first night, I awoke around 2 in the morning, utterly convinced someone had broken into my home. I searched every corner, cellar to attic, found nothing, yet the certainty lingered even after reason told me the house was secure. The floorboards creaked as they always do, but for the first time they sounded like footsteps following me. I stood in the hall an hour, clutching my pistol, listening to a danger I could not identify. The second night was worse. I did not sleep at all. Every time I closed my eyes, images of catastrophe flashed behind them: fire, ruin, betrayal, threats from men who have never once crossed me. I checked locks, windows, barns, every outbuilding, over and over. Nothing was wrong. Nothing. And yet everything felt wrong. This morning, I went to the slave quarters. The 3 men housed with Elias were huddled away from him as far as the room allowed. They said he had stared at the wall the entire night, not sleeping, not moving, just standing there. I asked him if he was well. He turned those hollow eyes on me and said, "Yes, sir, I'm well." And in that moment, I knew what you feared, Mr. Mercer. It is not what he does. It is what happens to men who try to understand what he is. I am sending him back. Your gate will receive him before the hour is out. I ask no refund. I want nothing from you but distance from that man. For your own sake, do not sell him to anyone close to you. Whatever afflicts him spreads like sickness, and I will not be responsible for passing it to another soul. Yours in desperation,
Rufus Hale. Mercer read the letter twice, then a third time. His hands began to tremble so badly he had to set the paper down. When he stepped to the window, he saw the wagon emerging through the pine-lined road. The horses moved fast, as though the driver feared slowing down. Elias sat in the back, unbound, still, expression unchanged. Reddick arrived breathless. "Sir, the traitor, he's returned him. Hale won't take a single coin. What should we do?" "Put him in the outbuilding," Mercer said. His voice sounded foreign, even to himself. "Lock him in. No contact with the others." "Sir, the outbuilding is for punishment. Elias hasn't disobeyed." "Lock him in." Reddick obeyed. The outbuilding stood 50 yards from the slave quarters, a wooden structure without windows, the floor packed dirt, the interior dark even at midday. Used rarely, reserved for men who posed the danger to others, it was a place of isolation more than discipline. Elias stepped inside without protest, turning once to look at Mercer before the door closed and the bolt slid into place. "He didn't resist," Moses reported. "Didn't ask why. Didn't look confused or angry. Just walked in like you'd asked him to step into a barn." "That's enough," Mercer said. That night, Mercer sat in his study with Hale's letter spread open before him, alongside his own journal. He needed clarity, objectivity, something grounded in fact rather than fear. He dipped his pen, steadied his hand, and wrote, May 23, 1843. "I have owned Elias 73 days. In that time, 3 separate individuals, myself included, experienced escalating fear, disordered sleep, and obsessive thoughts. Elias has displayed no aggression, no defiance, no threats. The disturbances appear entirely psychological. The question remains whether Elias causes these effects or whether knowledge of his past shapes our interpretation of his silence." He listed arguments for and against each possibility, but the words devolved into loops, circles of reasoning that proved nothing except the depth of his confusion. He pressed his forehead into his palms. A man of reason should not be unraveling this way. 3 days later, while walking past the equipment shed with the window open, Mercer overheard a conversation that stilled him. Samuel Price's voice carried in the air, a deep, steady voice lined with age. "You want to know what I think, Mr. Reddick?" Samuel was saying. "I think that man in the outbuilding shows y'all what you already are." Reddick snorted. "Explain." "Masters live afraid. Afraid we'll run, afraid we'll rise up, afraid we'll burn the fields or slip poison in your food. You call it caution, but it's fear. Always has been. Then along comes someone who shows no fear, no anger, no gratitude, none of the things you expect us to show so you feel comfortable." Samuel paused. "Elias doesn't play the part. And without the part, you see your own fear, clear as day. It ain't him causing it, it's you." "That's foolish talk," Reddick said, but without conviction. "Is it?" Samuel replied. "Mr. Mercer bought a man he already believed was dangerous. What happens then? He watches for danger every day, and when you look for fear long enough, you'll find it, even if it's only in your own reflection." Mercer stood frozen behind the open window, the words hitting with the force of revelation. Samuel wasn't wrong. The idea rang too true, struck too deeply. Elias hadn't done a thing. He'd merely removed the emotional script that made the system tolerable. Mercer stepped outside. "Samuel?" he said quietly. "A word." Reddick paled. Samuel turned calmly. "Yes, sir." "You've seen men like him before?" Mercer asked. "No, sir," Samuel replied. "But I've seen what fear does to men, and I've seen what truth does when someone stops pretending." The conversation ended abruptly, but the echo lingered long after both men walked away. That night, Mercer reread every page of his journal. Every line, every observation, pointed back to the same truth. The danger was never Elias. It was what Elias made men see in themselves. And though the realization should have brought clarity, it brought only dread, because if fear had been living inside him all along, then Elias had not infected him. Elias had revealed him, and that was far more terrifying. For the next 2 days, Mercer moved through Redwood Plantation like a man both awake and dreaming. Every sound seemed sharper: the creak of porch boards, the rustle of pine branches, the rhythmic splash of the river against the embankment. Yet everything also felt muffled, as though he walked beneath a heavy veil. Nothing had changed in the external world, yet everything inside him had begun to tilt. His journal sat open on the desk, filled with entries that no longer felt like rational observations, but like confessions he had been too proud to recognize. The collapse of his thoughts, the rising certainty of danger, the way Elias's silence consumed his attention, they now read like symptoms of a sickness he had never known he carried. But why had 3 men before him died from the same affliction? No answer came. He needed outside clarity. So Mercer did something he had never done before. He wrote to the Charleston constabulary. His letter took 3 hours to compose, the first draft too frantic, the second too vague. The final version was measured, almost clinical, stating that Elias posed no physical threat, but created conditions of psychological instability that endangered those responsible for supervising him. He submitted his journals, Hale's letter, Sloane's documents. He did not ask the law to punish Elias, he simply asked for guidance. Guidance from anyone whose mind was not already circling the edges of dread. 5 days later, a rider approached Redwood carrying official papers. Deputy Marshal Edwin Wilkes had been dispatched to investigate. Wilkes arrived in the early morning of June 2nd, a man in his late 40s, sandy-haired, with the weary steadiness of someone who had seen more than his share of violence and lies. He introduced himself with formality, though his gaze lingered on Mercer longer than necessary, quietly assessing. "I've read your correspondence," Wilkes said as they entered the study. "It is unusual." "I know," Mercer replied. "What I don't know is whether you want me to prove your sanity or your fears." Mercer didn't answer. Wilkes spent 2 days interviewing everyone on the plantation. He questioned Reddick, Moses, Samuel, several field hands, even Mercer's wife. He asked for descriptions, not judgments, facts, not interpretations. He reviewed the documents from Virginia, Hale's letter from Savannah, and Mercer's journals with a careful, methodical eye. On the second afternoon, Wilkes approached the outbuilding alone. "Unlock it," he told Reddick. Reddick hesitated, a moment too long. "That was not a request," Wilkes added. Reddick complied. The moment the door opened, the dim interior revealed Elias sitting exactly as before. Straight-backed, hands resting loosely on his knees, posture composed enough to appear intentional. His eyes lifted when light entered the room, but no other part of him stirred. Wilkes stepped inside, studying him with a level, unflinching gaze. Elias blinked once. "What is your name?" Wilkes asked. "Elias, sir." "Do you understand why you are confined?" "Yes, sir." "Why?" "Because men are troubled by me." Wilkes paused, not because of the words themselves, but because of the complete absence of tone. It was neither complaint nor accusation, simply fact. "Have you threatened anyone here?" "No, sir." "Have you attempted escape?" "No, sir." "Have you disobeyed instructions?" "No, sir." Wilkes studied him longer. Elias did not fidget, did not avert his gaze, did not show fear. And yet there was no arrogance either. Only a blank, steady presence that made even Wilkes's practiced composure shift slightly. After nearly an hour, Wilkes stepped out and ordered the door locked again. That evening, during supper, he asked Mercer to meet privately. Mercer lit the lamps in the study as dusk crept across the plantation. Wilkes remained standing for several moments before speaking. "I've conducted many investigations. I've seen murderers with less dread surrounding them than this man you keep locked in an outbuilding." Mercer's throat tightened. "But dread," he continued, is not evidence. So I need to ask you directly." He looked Mercer squarely in the eye. "Has Elias ever harmed you in any way?" "No." "Has he threatened you?" "No." "Has he done anything a reasonable man would consider dangerous?" Mercer hesitated. His mind flickered through months of sleeplessness, nightmares, obsessive thoughts, dread without source. But none of it involved Elias acting. "No," Mercer whispered. "Nothing." Wilkes nodded slowly, as though confirming something he already suspected. "You told me in your letter that you feared you might be following the same path as his former owners, and that may be true. But you also wrote something else, something most men in your position would never admit." Mercer waited. "You wrote that you were afraid of what you were becoming, not of what he was doing. That distinction matters a great deal." Mercer swallowed. "Then what do you believe is happening?" Wilkes exhaled deeply, sank into the chair across from him, and spoke with unexpected gentleness. "I think Elias terrifies men because he refuses to ease their conscience. Most enslaved people show fear, or gratitude, or defiance. Something that tells the master the world is operating the way he expects. Elias shows nothing. He doesn't play the part. And when a man stops playing the part you rely on, you must confront what you've built." The words pierced deeper than Wilkes likely intended. Wilkes continued. "Your worker, Samuel, said something insightful. He said Elias reflects what's already inside the men who own him, that he exposes the fear slavery breeds on both sides. After interviewing everyone here, I believe Samuel is correct." Mercer's hands shook where they rested on his knees. "So what do you advise?" he asked quietly. Wilkes leaned back. "The law cannot punish a man who has done nothing wrong, nor can it protect you from fears of your own making. There is, however, one option that may break this pattern entirely." Mercer raised his eyes. "You could free him." Mercer felt the room tilt. "Free him?" "You asked for a solution," Wilkes replied. "That may be the only one. Not because Elias is dangerous, but because your relationship to him is." Mercer stared at the deputy, unable to speak. Wilkes stood, placed his hat on his head, and paused at the doorway. "You wanted the law to guide you," he said. "It has. There is no crime here, only a truth you must decide whether to face." And with that, he left. Mercer sat motionless long after the hoofbeats faded. The lamps burned low, the plantation lay quiet under the darkening sky. Free him. The idea felt ludicrous, impossible, and yet it echoed through his mind with increasing clarity, like a bell that refused to stop ringing. Because deep down, he realized, it wasn't Elias who needed freeing, it was himself.
Mercer didn't sleep that night. His mind churned with Wilkes' words, Samuel's insights, Hale's trembling letter, and the accumulating pages of his own journal. Something within him had begun to split. The man he believed himself to be, and the man these past months had revealed. Near dawn, he walked toward the outbuilding for the first time since Elias had been locked inside. The morning air hung cool and heavy, the first light bleeding faintly along the tree line. The plantation was silent except for distant frogs and the whisper of the river. Mercer stood before the door and hesitated. He was afraid, truly afraid, not of Elias harming him. He knew now that Elias never had, but afraid of what he himself had become in Elias's presence. Afraid that Samuel had been right all along, that Elias's silence was not a threat, but a mirror, and that the reflection was unbearable. He slid the bolt free. The hinges creaked as he pushed the door open. Lantern light spilled across the hard-packed floor. Elias sat exactly where he had been placed, posture unchanged, back straight,
hands resting calmly atop his knees. When Mercer entered, Elias lifted his head. His face remained blank as ever, but Mercer, for the first time, sensed something behind the blankness. Not emotion, not hostility, something like absence, a deliberate absence, hollow and unreachable. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "Elias," he said, voice low, "I need to understand." Elias said nothing. "The men who owned you before me, they all died. You were present in each of their final days. You saw the same fear in them that I now feel in myself." Elias blinked slowly. "Tell me," Mercer said, struggling to keep his voice steady, "is there something you do, something you know, some influence you carry that drives men to madness?" For several seconds, silence stretched between them like a drawn wire. Then Elias spoke, softly, plainly, without inflection. "I worked for Mr. Boyd. I answered his questions. I followed his instructions. When he died, I was sold." Mercer waited. "I worked for Mr. Ames. I answered his questions. I followed his instructions. When he died, I was sold." He lifted his eyes to Mercer. "I worked for Mr. Lane. When he died, I was sold." Mercer swallowed hard. "And now? I work for you. I answer questions. I follow instructions. This is all I have done, sir." "But you understand the pattern," Mercer pressed. "You must see what happens to the men who own you." Elias studied him with those empty, endless eyes. "I see that men who own other men are afraid," Elias said. "I see that some cannot live with their fear. Fear of what? I do not know, but it is not caused by me. I do nothing except what I am told." Mercer felt the floor shift beneath him. "Then what are you? Why are you different from the others?" For the first time since Mercer had known him, a faint flicker, so faint it could have been imagined, crossed Elias's face. Not quite emotion, more the shadow of something that once was emotion and had long since been stripped away. "I stopped pretending," Elias said quietly. "I stopped performing the role expected of me. I stopped showing fear to make men feel powerful. Stopped showing gratitude to make them feel kind. Stopped showing sadness to make them feel righteous. Stopped showing hope to make them feel merciful." His voice remained flat, but the meaning felt like a blow. "I stopped lying," Elias said, "and that is what frightens men." Mercer felt something crumble inside him, something he had not realized was fragile. "So you choose to be this way," he whispered. "I choose to be honest," Elias replied. "If honesty troubles the men who own me, perhaps it is because they need the lie more than I ever did." Mercer couldn't breathe. He staggered back a step, lantern trembling in his grip. Everything Samuel had said was true. Everything Wilkes had seen was true. Elias had done nothing, had never once harmed anyone, never plotted, never fought, never rebelled. All he had done was refuse to participate in the emotional theater upon which slavery depended. The subtle performances that reassured masters that their power was natural, deserved, secure. Without those performances, the reality became intolerable. Owners saw themselves with bare, unshielded clarity, and many could not live with what they saw. Mercer fled the outbuilding, locking the door behind him with shaking hands. For the rest of that day, he moved through Redwood like a man half struck by lightning. Every sound startled him, every shadow unnerved him. His wife asked if he was unwell. Reddick watched him with concern. Moses kept his distance. Samuel met his gaze once with quiet understanding. Mercer knew what he needed to do,
though the decision felt as drastic as cutting off a limb. He summoned his lawyer, Alden Harwood, to Redwood the next morning. Harwood arrived on June 8th, dusty from travel, briefcase in hand. "Jonathan, you said the matter was urgent. It is. I need you to draw up manumission papers." "Manumission? For whom?" "For Elias." Harwood blinked. "Forgive me, but manumitting a slave you purchased not 3 months ago, especially one who has given no exceptional service, would raise questions." "Let them be raised," Mercer said. "This is not a matter for debate." Harwood hesitated. "May I ask the reason?" "You may ask, but you will not understand the answer." The paperwork required 3 days. South Carolina law demanded documentation and justification. Mercer fabricated both, exceptional loyalty and service beyond expectation. On June 11th, Mercer signed the final page. Elias would be granted freedom, $20 in pay, and 90 days to leave the state before re-enslavement laws would take effect. Mercer walked to the outbuilding himself. The door creaked open. Elias rose slowly, eyes steady, unchanged. "You're free," Mercer said. "These papers prove it." He handed Elias the folded documents and the money pouch. "I don't know what you are," Mercer added. "I don't know if you changed us or if we revealed ourselves, but I cannot live with the uncertainty." Elias held the papers delicately between his fingers. Then he asked, "May I ask a question, sir?" Mercer nodded. "Do you think you will sleep better now?" The question sliced deeper than any accusation. Mercer had no answer. Elias did not wait for one. He walked away from Redwood, down the long dirt road, into the pine-filtered light, until his figure dissolved into the trees and was gone. That night, for the first time in weeks, Mercer slept without dreaming. But peaceful sleep did not erase the truth Elias had shown him. It only hid it for a while.
In the weeks after Elias walked away from Redwood Plantation, a strange quiet fell over the property, an unnatural calm, as though the land itself were recovering from an invisible storm. Mercer rose each morning expecting the tightness in his chest to return, expecting shadows to twist into threats not met before. The same routines carried on. The fields remained productive. Reddick continued his oversight with strict efficiency. Moses organized crews with steady authority. Yet Mercer moved among them with a new, disquieting awareness. The awareness that every interaction between master and enslaved person was built on layers of fear, expectations, and silent performances. Samuel noticed the change first. "Mr. Mercer different now," he told Moses one evening. "Silent in a new way. Looks at the fields like he finally seen what's been here all along." "Is that a good thing?" Moses asked. Samuel gave a soft shrug. "Truth don't much care if it's good or bad. It just is." In July, as summer heat thickened over the rice fields, Mercer found himself asking questions he had never asked in 20 years of plantation management. He asked Reddick whether the workers were treated fairly. He asked Moses whether the field crews needed more rest days during high heat. Once, he even approached Samuel directly and asked, "What do you think the men fear most here?" Samuel studied him for a long, thoughtful moment before answering. "The thing they fear most," Samuel said quietly, "is believing their life ain't worth nothing except the work they do for someone else. Everything else, whips, hardship, hunger, that's pain. But that thought, that's suffering." Mercer didn't reply, but he carried the words with him for days. By August, Redwood Plantation had settled into a new rhythm, familiar yet subtly altered by Mercer's changed demeanor. He was quieter, more contemplative, still firm, still dutiful in management, but no longer confident in the righteousness of his position. Sometimes he looked at the workers with an expression Moses couldn't quite name.
It wasn't pity. It wasn't guilt. It was recognition. Records show that Elias reached Charleston on June 15th. He presented his manumission papers at the docks and purchased passage on a northbound ship. The crew manifest listed him as Elias Freeman, age approximately 28, destination Boston, Massachusetts. After that, his trail blurred into rumor. In 1847, a brief article appeared in a Philadelphia newspaper describing a free black man dismissed from employment after the household claimed unsettling unease in his presence. No misconduct, no violence, only discomfort, born from a silence that neither soothed nor reassured. In 1851, a letter published in The Liberator mentioned a freedman in New York employed by an abolitionist family. The author described him as distinctly courteous yet profoundly impenetrable, offering no emotional cues one way or another. The family eventually asked him to move on, not because of anything he did, but because of something they felt. In 1856, a Philadelphia Quaker merchant wrote in his diary that he employed a man originally enslaved in Virginia who worked with unusual constancy and spoke rarely, as if sound were a burden rather than a necessity. The merchant recorded a single conversation. He told me that freedom is the distance between what others fear and what actually exists. I did not understand then. I believe I understand now. None of these accounts can be proven to describe Elias, but the patterns are consistent. Quiet presence, honest labor, and unyielding refusal to perform the emotions others expected of him. Some claimed that made him dangerous. Others claimed it made him free. Mercer lived until 1869. Redwood Plantation remained operational through the Civil War, though not untouched. Union blockades choked trade routes. Confederate agents requisitioned supplies. Laborers were conscripted for fortification projects. Enslaved people fled as Union forces pushed deeper into the South. By 1865, Redwood, like every plantation, had unraveled. Mercer adapted uneasily to wage labor and sharecropping. The ledger books recorded the same columns of numbers as before, yet nothing felt stable. The war had shaken the South awake, and nothing could lull it back to sleep. In his later years, Mercer kept journals again, thick volumes of reflections rather than plantation logs. He wrote obsessively about fear, ownership, and the fragile mechanics that held the old world together. He wrote about Wilkes' inquiry, Samuel's wisdom, Moses' concern, and most of all, he wrote about the man he once kept locked in a windowless room. A diary entry from 1862 reads, "I freed one man to save myself. Only afterward did I see that for most of my life I have lived as though imprisoned by my own need for control. Elias did nothing except refuse to comfort me with lies. In that refusal, he became the most honest thing I ever encountered. If slavery requires performance to function, then Elias broke the machinery by declining to participate. Nothing more, nothing less. The terror that followed was not in him. It lived in us." Another entry, dated 1866, simply states, "Sometimes I wonder whether Elias ever learned to look at others without seeing their fears staring back, or whether he carried that mirror with him wherever he went." Mercer never learned what became of Elias, but the unanswered question lingered in his writing until the day he died. Today, the outbuilding where Elias spent his final weeks at Redwood still stands as part of a historical site. Visitors walk through it without knowing the full story. Tour guides describe an unusual enslaved man who unsettled his owners, a curiosity more than a revelation. They mention 3 unexplained deaths, they mention the manumission, but the deeper truth, the truth Elias stripped bare, rarely enters the script. Even now, historians debate the same question Mercer asked repeatedly in his journals. Was Elias dangerous, or did he merely reveal the danger that already lived inside others? Did he unsettle the men who owned him? Or did he simply refuse to soothe the uneasy conscience of a society built upon domination? No one can answer with certainty. Maybe that is the point. Some mysteries exist not to be solved, but to expose what people fear acknowledging. And sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who refuses to pretend everything is normal. What do you think happened? Did Elias truly cause the fear around him? Or did he simply reveal the darkness others tried desperately not to see? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story made you question the past and yourself, subscribe for more American mysteries that history tried to bury.